Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Mental Health 101, giving you the tools you need to thrive. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Julia Marvin, and I'll be your moderator, and I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Olivia Marks. Olivia is a clinician here at Jefferson Center, and she'll be talking all about what we can do to boost our own mental health and support others. May is Mental Health Month, and this past year has shown us that our own mental health and well-being are more important than ever. COVID-19 has forced us all to readjust how we live our lives and learn new skills to cope with difficult times. During these times and other difficult times in our lives, it's possible to have good mental health by using tools to thrive. Today, we'll be talking all about mental health, including how to recognize signs and symptoms, how to prioritize your mental health, and ways we can all destigmatize mental health. And Olivia is also going to talk with us about some strategies and tools so that we can thrive. Before I hand the mic over to her, I do have a few housekeeping items to cover about the presentation. First, the webinar and slide deck will be available after this live session, and we'll be emailing those links to you. I would also encourage you to visit our website at jcmh.org, where we have more resources along with blog posts related to this topic and information about our other upcoming webinars. Please keep your microphones muted and turn off your video during the presentation. You'll also want to change your Zoom view to speaker mode for the best viewing presentation. Next, we'd love to hear from you. If you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the chat at the bottom of your player. We'll be answering those questions at the end of this session. And if we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. And last, we'd like to encourage you to follow us on our social networks and share the recording of this webinar and other information about Jefferson Center. So without further ado, Olivia, over to you.
Thanks, Julia. So I really appreciate you guys all being here for a conversation about mental health today. It is Mental Health Month, so it's nice to be able to talk about this and to do a little bit of work on destigmatizing and sharing some information. My hope today is that this is really just a starter conversation. You know, it's impossible to cover everything in an hour. And so I'm going to try to give you as many tangible, helpful tools as possible, but really I hope that we can continue to have this conversation as individuals and with our community moving forward about mental health and why it's important. So real briefly about Jefferson Center, we're the community mental health center for Jefferson, Gilpin, and Clear Creek counties and have been for over 60 years. We're a very mission-driven organization, and our hope is to provide for you guys and what you need as individuals and as a community. We work with individuals and families across the lifespan and provide mental health services as well as community-based services. We serve, like I said, everyone across the lifespan. We work with children, youth, families, seniors, veterans, and military personnel. And we want to meet everyone where you're at. So we offer quite an extensive offering of different services to the community. We have individual, group, and family therapy. We have peer support specialists who are individuals who are living with their own experience of mental illness and are working to help others reach resiliency and health. We have wellness classes and coaching that range a wide variety of topics that are free to the community, as well as parenting resources. So if it feels like you're not quite ready to jump into that therapy bucket, but you feel like you need a little bit more assistance with that, that's a great place to start if you're a parent. We have school-based services, which offer licensed clinicians in the public schools who can work with kids, during their school day, which is a great option for access to treatment. And we also have substance use treatment services. So today, again, is going to be kind of an overview. I hope to give you some tangible strategies, some things to look for in yourself and other people, and to get the conversation started about why mental health is important, particularly right now. We'll talk about stigma and just what mental health is and make sure that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about when I say mental health. I'll help identify some signs and symptoms and what you can do to prioritize your own wellness. We'll talk specifically about dealing with adjustment to life changes. Some of us have a mental health diagnosis, and some of us are just kind of going through something. Many of us can relate to that, I'm sure, in the last year or so. And so how to cope with that. And then identifying strategies and what some next steps can be. If this presentation brings some stuff up for you and you're realizing that there might be some more that you need. So what do I mean when I say mental health? I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing here. And there's two kind of categories. The first one would be a disorder or a diagnosis or a mental illness. I'm kind of going to use those words interchangeably today. A disorder is a neurobiological disorder of the brain and is a disease much like something like heart disease or cancer. And also like heart disease and cancer, it is treatable. What's different is that we don't necessarily have the technology to diagnose it in the same way that you would a physical illness. I couldn't take a blood test and tell you that you have depression, but there are physical, chemical, biological factors that oftentimes impact mental illness. Additionally, there are often a lot of environmental factors. So if there's been a trauma or other environmental factors like family stress or poverty or grief and loss would be an environmental factors, those all contribute to mental health. So then in addition, we can talk about mental health in a little bit more of a global sense, where we're talking about mental wellness. We all have mental health in the same way that we all have physical health, and we exist somewhere on that spectrum of wellness, and that can move throughout the day or throughout the week or throughout the year. And it's really a practice of giving attention and awareness to your mental wellness in the same way that you're probably aware of how you physically feel today. I wonder how much of us are aware of how we're mentally feeling today. And if so, what do we need next? I have exercise here in quotes because in the same way that you do things to physically take care of your body, like exercise and diet, we can do things to practice proactively mental wellness. Things to take care of ourselves. And then sometimes that's not quite enough and we need some outside help, whether that's a friend or a professional or medication. Sometimes that's what we need to be able to take care of ourselves. So mental health exists in fairly high numbers in the United States. 21% of adults have a diagnosed mental illness and 17% of youth. These statistics are coming from 2019, so I would anticipate that these numbers have gone up since 2020. And of those individuals who have been diagnosed, who are experiencing mental illness, only 45% of adults get treatment and 51% of youth get treatment. So that means that the majority of people who are experiencing mental illness are going untreated and just living with that. In between the onset of symptoms and a person actually getting treatment, the average amount of time is 11 years. And I want to remind you on the earlier slide that mental health is treatable. So we don't have to live with this for 11 years. There are things that you can do for yourself, and there are things that other people can help you with. This is not by any means an exhaustive list, but these are the most common diagnoses in the US. I won't go through all these numbers, but the most common are anxiety disorder and depression. And again, this would be a diagnosis, so that number doesn't represent all the people who experience daily symptoms of anxiety and depression or post-traumatic stress and haven't necessarily been diagnosed, or maybe they don't meet full diagnostic criteria, but it's still something that impacts them on a daily basis. So when I talk about diagnosis or disorder, these are the kinds of things that I'm referring to. So we know that it exists in decently high numbers, and we know what it is and what it looks like, but why are we talking about this today? Why is it important? Obviously, on an individual level, it can be really impactful if every day you're waking up with anxiety or sadness that feels like it's never going to go away, or fear of things in your environment. But in addition to the mental symptoms of mental health, there's physical symptoms of mental health. I'm going to mention a couple times today the connection between our brain and our body. And as we continue to understand more, this research shows an even stronger and stronger connection between our physical health and our mental health. So individuals who experience mental health are at increased risk for diseases like diabetes or cancer, and cardiometabolic disease is twice as high. When our body experiences stress, it does a whole bunch of physical things, including increasing hormones and chemicals and shutting down certain systems and turning up certain systems in the body. And I could give you a whole presentation on just that connection. But a takeaway from this is that it is okay for us to experience stress in small bursts, which is what our biology is meant to do in order for survival. But we're not meant to stay in a place of stress for an extended period of time. And that wears down our physical bodies. So that's on a personal level. On a communal level, 21% of people who are experiencing homelessness have a mental illness. 37% of people who are incarcerated in United States state and federal prisons have a mental illness, and 70% of youth in the juvenile justice system have a mental illness. So these numbers are pretty big and indicate that interactive relationship between mental health and our communal systems. So you can imagine beyond this number, the impact that has on things like, the economy and our overall running of these symptoms and the weight that this puts on those systems. In addition, 1 in 8 of all emergency department hospital visits in the US are due to either mental illness or substance use. So it's having an impact on our medical healthcare system as well. And then if we zoom out even further and look at the global community, depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. And depression and anxiety together cost the global economy $1 trillion each year in productivity. So as we look at all of these different bullet points and the ways that mental health impacts individuals and families and communities and our national and global community, we can see that this is a pretty big issue beyond what is really relevant, just, a personal feeling of wellness. It goes well beyond the individual. Suicide is also why mental health matters, but I wanted to give it its own slide and pay a little bit of extra attention to this because this has a ripple effect. We see when an individual dies by suicide that other people around them are more likely to. And obviously that has an impact on families and communities as a whole. So I wanted to give a little bit of special attention to this. And this is not going to be extensive either. We could have an entire presentation on this as well. So if there are things that are here that are standing out to you, whether it's for yourself or another person, I really encourage you to reach out. But suicide is the second leading cause of death for individuals aged 10 to 34. And overall in the US, it's the 10th leading cause of death. So this is not a small subject. And those rates have been increasing by 35% since 1999. Those numbers have been going up. 46% of individuals who have died by suicide had a diagnosed mental health condition, but 90% were experiencing symptoms and were undiagnosed. And that information comes posthumously from talking to family and friends who are able to identify that there were some symptoms, but that person hadn't necessarily sought treatment. The majority, 78% of people who die by suicide are male. And I didn't put the number up here, but the majority of attempts are actually female, but the majority of people who are lost to suicide are male. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 times more likely to die by suicide, and transgender individuals are 12 times more likely to die by suicide. So those are communities that need a little bit extra resources and education in mental health overall. It is a very common myth that talking about suicide with somebody or asking them if they've thought about it might plant the idea in their head or that it might make them more likely to follow through. This is a really common and well-intentioned thought, but unfortunately it's incorrect and leads to an issue of a lot of people feeling like they can't talk about suicide. So in fact, by talking about it with somebody, statistically, we do not see that increased likeliness. And in fact, it might have the opposite effect by letting the person know that you're comfortable talking about suicide, that you're a safe person to talk to, and that you see them, that you see that they're experiencing something and that you're concerned. And that can really be the first step in getting them the help that they need. Um, so if you know somebody and you're kind of worried about them, don't be afraid to ask the question. Ask them, I've noticed these things and I'm concerned. You have this kind of behavior. I'm wondering if you're thinking about killing yourself. I also want to mention, to avoid saying it like, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? That kind of sends the message, I don't really want to talk about this, and I hope that the answer is no, and you're not opening that door all the way. So being comfortable with asking that question, and I really want to acknowledge but dismantle the fear that you're going to make the problem worse. And if you do know somebody, or if you've had thoughts about suicide or do currently, I have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline here, and I would actually encourage you to just put this number in your phone. I have that in my personal and professional cell phone just to have. You never know when you might need it, and that can be a really kind gesture to help connect somebody with a resource as a starting point. So that number is 1-800-273-8255. And I'll give you some more resources at the end and other more local resources and phone numbers. But I wanted to give that one as a starting point. So it's important to know what your own signs and symptoms are. When you start to get run down, when it feels like your mental health is feeling a little bit thin, what does that look like for you? It's different for everybody. So here's some common ones. Again, this is going to be really personal, so I don't have everything up here, but just some things to start thinking about. Lack of enjoyment in previously enjoyable activities. Are you doing things that used to make you feel really happy and now it just feels kind of bland or empty? Physical symptoms, again, that connection between the brain and the body. These things can be signs of a physical illness, but a lot of times they start in a psychological place. Common ones would be stomach aches, heartburn, headaches, tension. Some people notice rashes that come with stress or hair loss. For me, my shoulders get really tense. So when that starts to happen, I know that my body is sending me some sort of signal that I need to slow down. Irritability, if you're finding that you're snapping at people really quickly or finding like nobody understands what's happening for me, that's something to pay attention to. Overeating or undereating are pretty common signs. Having difficulty sleeping, if you notice that you're lying in bed and your thoughts are spinning and your mind is racing and you can't just get it to turn off, or feeling like you're constantly tired. It doesn't matter how much sleep you get, you're always feeling lethargic and like you always want to be in bed or taking a nap, or having a hard time getting up in the morning on a persistent basis. Isolating from other people and hiding, or the opposite of that, having kind of an anxiety or fear about being alone and not wanting to be left with your own thoughts and trying to constantly surround yourself with people so that you don't have to be alone. I don't think that one is talked about very much because we think of isolation more often, but we can definitely use people as sort of a blocker for what's going on with ourselves. And then keeping secrets. A lot of times people who are dealing with a mental illness, maybe it's thoughts about suicide, or maybe it's another deep, scary thought that you have that feels shameful, or maybe hiding drug and alcohol use, or just not wanting to talk about it. If you're noticing that that's happening, or if you notice that in another person, that's just a good thing to look out for. You'll notice that a lot of these things are contradictory. Overeating and undereating are opposites. Inability to sleep and excessive tiredness are opposites. And that's really because our symptoms are as diverse as our brains, and this looks different for every person. So it is important to start to pay attention to what your own symptoms are so that you can listen to them when they show up. This list is a little bit more diagnostic, and we'd be looking at more of those kind of bigger mental illnesses like a generalized anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder. But I want you to know what these are, whether for yourself or someone else, just to kind of have that on your radar. So feeling sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks or for a persistent amount of time, making plans to try to harm yourself or end your own life, severe and out of control risk-taking behavior, harming self or others. So if you notice that somebody is going out and interacting with strangers and seem to have no regard for their own safety, and that's happening more than just, a big night out, but happening on kind of a regular basis, that's something to pay attention to. A sudden and overwhelming fear, sometimes for no reason, and sometimes with those somatic symptoms, the tension, the heart racing, the sweating. Significant weight loss or gain that's not related to a lifestyle change. Seeing, hearing, or believing things that others don't. And I do want to make a note about this, that there are certainly cultural and religious practices where this is okay and even celebrated. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a mental illness. So it is important to consider where there might be a cultural piece interacting with that. Excessive drug or alcohol use, drastic changes in mood, behavior, personality, or sleeping habits, extreme difficulty concentrating or staying still, and intense worry or fear that inhibits daily activities. So that's a pretty big list. I don't expect that you would remember all of these things or memorize them, but there's two themes here that I want to point out. One is a significant change that seems persistent and like it's not necessarily related to life circumstances. So if your friend who usually looks pretty put together and is usually dressed well and groomed and everything is constantly showing up in sweats and it seems like maybe they haven't showered in a few days, if that's different for them and that seems abnormal, listen to your gut on that. There might be something going on. And the other piece about this list that I want to point out is that there are things that impact your ability to enjoy life the way that you would want to, or they get in the way of things that are important. If it's preventing you from participating at work, if it's preventing you from engaging in relationships that are important, if it's causing you to feel disconnected from people, that's a sign that something bigger might be going on. So therapy is an option, but before we get to that, and I'll talk about that too, I want to just give you some ideas of things that you can start with on your own, some things that can just start at home. So gratitude is an excellent counteract to something like depression. And it doesn't mean that you have to be feeling this to acknowledge it. So if you're feeling pretty awful and it's hard to feel an appreciation for the things that you have in life, that's okay. Starting by just identifying what they are and going through those motions as a starting point can be a really great place to start off. Routine is really helpful for regulating the nervous system. It lets your body know what to anticipate, can give you things to look forward to, and can help you kind of go through the motions when it's hard to get started, similar to that gratitude journal. Sleep hygiene is just a word for a group of things that help to improve quality and quantity of sleep. So this would include things like decreasing screen time for a couple hours before bed, only using your bed for sleep and not doing things like snacking in bed or watching TV in bed, decreasing caffeine in the afternoon and minimizing naps. These are all things that are going to help improve quality and quantity of sleep. And sleep is super important. This is when your brain does its reset, it's storing memories, it's processing information. So if you're not getting a good night's sleep, that is an excellent place to start with mental health. Meditation and mindfulness have shown to have a plethora of positive impacts with mental health. But basically, it's the act of paying attention to what's happening in the moment and is really helpful to ground your mind and body in the present moment. Wonderful for anxiety, but also a great practice overall just for wellness in general. Connecting with other people, reaching out to a friend, going on a walk with somebody, spending time in community organizations is excellent for mental health. It gets us out of our own brain bubble and connecting us with other people. And then identifying and connecting with a purpose. A lot of times when we're experiencing hardship, it feels like, what am I doing here? What am I contributing to the world? So thinking about what that is, whether that's on a bigger scale, my purpose is to serve others in this way or whatever it is, or if it's just for the day. Today, what I want to accomplish and what I want to output, is this, and then going with that. Bringing it back to the body again, exercise and healthy diet help with those chemical balances in your body, which impact your brain, which impact mental health. Also, if that gets you outside, that's even better, connecting with nature. Repetitive physical tasks like routine are also very soothing to the nervous system. So a couple examples: knitting, coloring, baking things, making things like woodworking. You're also engaging that tactile experience, which is very grounding if you're feeling kind of lost in the headspace and need to come back to the present moment. Engaging in creativity, similar to physical tasks, but what I mean by creativity isn't necessarily arts and crafts, though that's wonderful too, but just the act of creating things. Creation is a pretty fundamental human experience and is the kind of an antidote to something like depression, which keeps us in stagnation. And so creativity can kind of kickstart that re-engagement with life. And then thinking about and finding and engaging with what you can control. A lot of times if our mental illness is coming from something environmental or circumstantial, a lot of times those are things that we can't do anything about. And that's really hard to not have control of what's happening in your life. So finding something that you can control and engaging with that. For example, I was working with a therapist once. I had some things going on in my life that were very much out of my control, and I was in kind of a funky space for a while. And through my conversation with her, I decided to deep clean and rearrange my entire apartment. And by doing that, I acknowledged that I can't control the things that are happening out there, but I can control what's happening in here. And that felt really good to take some ownership. These bottom four are bolded. And the reason why is because these are kind of cornerstones and foundation to the human existential experience and encompass a lot of things. So I bolded these as kind of a place to, a theme to come back to think about on a larger level, not just what are the little things that are going to promote wellness throughout the day, which are really important, but on a bigger level, what's going on for me on an existential scale, and where can I tap into some of those, holes that might be missing. This is an awesome tool that I've used a lot for myself and for clients to just recognize that there are many facets of wellness and of ourself and of what's going on with our lives. And this is a good place to start for maybe some ideas, but also just a little bit of a check-in. So psychological wellness is things like if you do go to therapy, if you're using a journal, if you're connecting with supportive people in your community, asking for help. Emotional wellness are things like self-love, connecting with people that are important to you, practicing forgiveness and practicing self-compassion. Spiritual things can be, religious or spiritual practices, and they can also be things like yoga or dancing or going into nature, meditating, watching the sunset, recognizing that we have a spiritual component in whatever form that takes for you, or in whatever way you practice that. Personal wellness, so thinking about what are your goals in life? What are you wanting to do for yourself, fostering friendships and relationships, spending time with family, trying out a new hobby, going on a date, just taking care of those personal pieces, professional wellness, taking breaks, finding something that feels fulfilling, where you're tapping into that purpose. Are you doing something that feels meaningful to you? Asking for support, looking for supervision, plan a vacation, and then physical wellness. So starting with really our basic needs of housing and nutrition, and medical care, and then getting into a little bit of the higher things like getting enough sleep and taking some exercise, getting a massage, going on a walk, turning off the cell phone. That one's big. I assume that a lot of us are spending a lot of time on webinars like this one or Zoom calls, and so turning off the screen and taking care of your eyes and your physical body. So again, just a good way to check in and notice, am I doing really well in this area, but kind of neglecting this other one, and using it as an opportunity to get a little bit more specific in identifying what you might need. And I will have a link to that at the end. So once you identify that some symptoms are happening and you know what might work to help get you out of the place that you're in, we certainly have to make mental health a priority. And as important as it is, and even for myself who has built a career around mental health, it is really hard to prioritize. We don't do that super well culturally. And you're the only one who can really prioritize your own mental health. So I encourage you to take this seriously and really think about concretely, where can I make this a priority in my life? So a couple tips or ideas. One would be to schedule breaks and time throughout the day for things that center you. In the same way that you would put a doctor's appointment on your calendar and say, I'm not available for meetings at that time. Do that for your therapy appointments. Do that for a lunch break. Do that for a walk that you want to take. Make sure that you're not brushing that aside for things that you decide in the moment are more important, because this is very important. Be willing to say no. This is maybe as much for myself as anybody else, but it's easy to just keep filling up your schedule and keep saying yes to everybody and being there for everyone else. And that's a really easy way to neglect what you need. So, bite the bullet and say no when you need to, and take a moment for yourself. Which brings me to putting your own oxygen mask on first before someone else's. If you are running yourself dry and you don't have anything left to give, you're not really going to be very helpful. This is really important for people who are, in a helping profession or are a caregiver, or for parents. If you're constantly attending to other people and you're not attending to your own needs, you're going to run out. Thinking of your mental health like you think of your physical health, and addressing it in that way. So, if my ankle is kind of hurting and I'm sort of limping around, I might see if that goes away for a couple of days and think, maybe this will pass. But if it doesn't, I'm not going to wait 11 years to go to a doctor like people often do with mental health. I'm going to get an x-ray, I'm going to get it treated, and I'm going to feel better, hopefully in a pretty quick amount of time. So if you think of your mental health that way, we would never let our physical health go untreated for that long. And listening to your body to let you know when something needs to be done. So I mentioned that I get a lot of tension in my shoulders. When it's to the point that I feel like my shoulders are up to my ears and I can't relax my neck, my body is sending off an alarm saying, you need to slow down, or you need to ask for help, or you need to take a day off, or you need to eat better, or whatever it is. That the tension is building, and I need to listen to what that alarm system is saying and figure out what needs to happen next. So listen to your bodies. Making a plan is really important, because I assume some of you have experienced this when it's one of those dark mental days, and the last thing that you want to do is get out of bed, and the first thing that might help is to cook yourself breakfast or go on a walk or drink a big glass of water. That's not where our head is at. Our head is stuck in that dark cloud, and you're going to forget everything that we've talked about today and everything that you learned about how to take care of yourself. So making a plan to do yourself a favor in the future, and giving yourself a reminder of what those things are that work, so you can just kind of try them out one at a time when you're in that dark place. And then letting others know what the plan is. If you have a friend or a family member who kind of knows what it looks like when you're starting to struggle, and they know that fresh air tends to be really helpful for you, they could say, hey, I know something's going on. Do you want to go for a walk? Or I know this big thing just happened in your life. I'm wondering if you want to, you know, take a day off and go on a trip together, or whatever it is that you need to do. But letting others know about it gives them an opportunity to send you that lifeline, and also gives you some accountability when it feels too hard to pull yourself up on your own. So sometimes we do all of those things and it's still not enough, and that is okay. So there are more formalized professional treatments that can help you to get that care that you need. Classic talk therapy. This has a lot of different, there are a lot of different kinds of therapy. Therapists practice in a variety of different ways. And I don't really have time today to go into all of those, but know that there are a wide range of approaches. And some approaches seem to be more commonly effective for different things. So if you are connecting to a therapist, or if you're connecting to Jefferson Center, we work to find a placement that makes sense for what you are wanting to work on. And you can also look into some resources on your own to identify what kind of therapy might be good for you. And I've got a link for that at the end of the PowerPoint. Medications, for when it is more of that chemical imbalance and less of the environmental, can do and can really take the edge off to let something like therapy or those self-help strategies work better. Sometimes we need just a little bit of that brain reset, and we find that medications with therapy work very well together. Support groups are a really neat tool to be able to connect with people who are experiencing something similar to you that might feel isolating, and to be able to see that you are very much not alone, that your experience is quite normal, and to hear some other things that people have gone through and worked through. That can be helpful in a way that a therapist is not always able to connect. So that's a really, really cool option. And Jefferson Center does offer quite a few of those. And then education programs. Sometimes the first step is just understanding what's going on. It can be scary, particularly if there's a new diagnosis or something feels different than it used to and you're not sure what it is. Just having an understanding of what's happening can really go a long way. And then in addition to all those formalized treatments, sometimes therapy is an excellent place to be, and it's also not the whole picture. Going back to that self-care wheel, we are a lot of different things. We're not just psychological beings. So using some of these other strategies that have been found to be really helpful with mental health, yoga, mindfulness, martial arts like Tai Chi, supplements, diet, animal-assisted therapy. This list is very long, or could be very long, but just thinking about what might be helpful for you specifically, and using any resource that might be at your disposal. So I'm assuming that some of you have been in therapy, and I'm assuming that some of you haven't. And I want to kind of demystify this process a little bit and make it a little bit scary and give you some kind of inside scoop on what happens in therapy so that it feels a little bit more reachable. And for starters, I want to emphasize that therapy can be for anyone. I have heard a lot of people say things like, well, I'm going through something, but I don't think I need therapy, or it's not really that bad, or I don't have like depression, I'm just feeling down. Those are all good enough reasons. Even just wanting to go to explore what greater wellness can look like for you. Again, in the same way that our physical health can always be a little bit better, our mental wellness can always be a little bit better. So there isn't a small one. There's no reason that's too small to want to go to therapy. And so if if anything from today has stood out, or if there's any pieces of this that sound a little bit like you, I would consider. I would encourage you to consider this. Um, so what actually happens when you go to therapy? Usually they'll start by gathering a personal history. And the purpose of this is really to understand you as a whole person beyond just the particular issue that you're bringing in. So the more that you're able to share, the better idea they can get of who you are, and the more they can help you. However, it's okay if you don't feel ready for all of that right away, or if there's pieces that you don't necessarily want to share now or ever. I want to emphasize on this slide that you are in charge of your own therapy. You are the boss in that room. And so you get to decide what you want to do with that time. The more open you are, the more potential you can get out of it, but you don't have to. So the first day, you don't have to tell them all of your dark secrets. And I think that's a fear that prevents a lot of people from walking in the door, is that vulnerability. Hopefully the therapist tells you a little bit about what they're doing, what their style and method is. And if not, feel free to ask, you know, what kinds of things do you do to treat your patients in therapy or your clients in therapy, and get to know a little bit more about what they're doing. This therapy isn't a secretive process. We're not using reverse psychology to get you to to do something that we want in a backwards way. It should be very open and transparent. So if you have questions, or if things feel scary, or you know, if they're introducing something new that you haven't seen before, ask what's happening. Then you'll work together to identify goals and collaboratively design a treatment plan. Again, you're the boss, so the goals that you want are important. Your therapist might have some recommendations, and that is coming from a professional knowledge standpoint, but ultimately you get to decide what you take and what you leave. There may be things that you don't find particularly helpful, and that's fine. And hopefully some things that you do. So working together to come up with treatment plans and goals. And then building a relationship and getting to know each other. The relationship, they've actually found this repeatedly over a long period of time, that the therapeutic relationship between the therapist and the client is the number one predictor of treatment outcomes in therapy. So the techniques are important. The methods are important. The therapist's, you know, knowledge of what's going on with you is important, but all of those things come after having a strong and trusting relationship. So that'll be a big part of what's happening. And then you address the goals, and the therapist uses whatever theory or methods that they use, and start working on that treatment plan. So yeah, I already mentioned this, the predictor of treatment success. So, you know, if you call and are connecting with a therapist, we'll work to find somebody who hopefully is a good fit for you, and is going to be able to address the needs that you're bringing into session. So just a couple resources to have. Again, this is a number that you could definitely put into your phone. Colorado Crisis Services are available 24/7, 365, for free and professional help or crisis intervention. And Jefferson Center partners with Colorado Crisis Services and has a walk-in center at this address at Wadsworth. So that is for all of you to use. We also have a number that you can text, which is a great option if it feels a little bit scary to talk to somebody on a phone, or awesome for teens who spend a lot of time on their phones and might feel more comfortable using something like that. So keep this in mind. Keep these numbers and addresses for any sort of crisis service that you might need, mental health related. Then a couple additional resources. So all those facts and figures came from this first one, the National Alliance on Mental Health. NAMI has an awesome website with a lot of resources and additional information on things like different kinds of therapy, you know, what to expect, some blogs, and just information on various mental illnesses. The next link is just some tips on how to incorporate mindfulness throughout your day. And if mindfulness isn't necessarily your jam, still a good place to look at how to kind of tune in and take care of yourself throughout the day and take some breaks. If you are into meditation, there's a lot of wonderful apps. I've used quite a few of them, and I have no complaints about any of them, but I put Insight Timer up here specifically because it's completely free and has a large database of guided meditations that are all free. The next one is an article from Psychology Today with a few ways to practice self-care. So just a couple more ideas to get those wheels spinning. And then the self-care wheel that I shared earlier. There's also a blank version of that form, so you can kind of fill it in yourself. Before we wrap up, I want to just mention the Jefferson Center Speakers Bureau, which is the group that brought this presentation to you guys today. We offer free presentations to community groups. So if you are part of a group that you think would benefit from a presentation like this, the website is jcmh.org/speakersbureau. All presentations are given by a licensed professional, and we talk about a broad range of topics. So, really broad ones like mental health 101 from today, or more specific like anxiety and burnout and depression, things like that. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, definitely reach out. If you're wanting to get more involved with Jefferson Center, here are a few places that you can start. We are a nonprofit organization, so if donation is something that you're interested or able to do, that helps us to be able to provide free services like this to the community, and is absolutely appreciated. We have a mental health first aid training course that we also put on, which gives you tools to be able to respond to a variety of different mental health crisis scenarios. And then we've got, frequent events and talks like this, all that can be found on the website. I'd love to take a minute to answer any questions that you guys have.
Wonderful, Olivia, thank you so much, and thank you for all that information. As a reminder, if you've got a question, feel free to drop it into the chat and we'll get those answered. We have had a couple of questions so far. So Olivia, the first one is there such a thing as good or helpful stress?
Absolutely. Yeah, really insightful question. So like I briefly mentioned, stress is a body's very natural response to cues in the environment, and it's designed to help us survive. So there can be stress that helps us function with more acute attention or perform at a higher level if it's in small amounts. So today, I was feeling a little bit nervous coming into the presentation. That's a little bit of stress that says this is something that's important and matters, and then ends up with me putting some effort into it. So that's helpful stress. And when it becomes unhelpful is either when we're experiencing fear of something that isn't actually there, things like, I shouldn't say isn't actually there, but fear about something that isn't actually a threat. And then when it becomes persistent, that's when we start to see those negative effects on mental health. But yes, very good question. There is absolutely helpful stress.
Thank you. And then our next question is, my husband has been really sad recently, but every time I try and bring it up, he just says he's fine. What can I do to help him?
That's a tough question. I would say, for starters, it's okay to give him some space, but checking in with him lets him know that you're there, if he is ready at some point to talk about it. It can also be helpful. I assume that there can be some sort of defensiveness when a person feels like you might be calling them out. So saying something that just recognizes your experience of what's happening. So saying something like, I've noticed this lately, and I'm concerned, or I feel like we're disconnected. And just talking to your own experience rather than making assumptions about what he's thinking and feeling or targeting him. Um, and I do think that when you do ask, you're letting him know that you're there, and it's okay to say it once and then just kind of let it settle for a little bit and see if he might be ready to come to you at some point.
Thank you. And then our final question is, I've tried therapy in the past, but I felt like I didn't vibe with my therapist and I quit going. Do you have tips for finding a therapist or figuring out if someone's a good fit for me?
Yeah, I've had that experience too. I think that's really common. So thanks for that question. Um, there are a number of things that you can do. One is just if you have an idea of what didn't really work last time, when you do connect to a therapist, letting them know what some of your preferences are. Um, for example, one style of therapy might be not really asking a lot of questions, but being more neutral and just kind of affirming and reflecting back. Some people love that and some people don't. So if you noticed something like that that felt frustrating or like it didn't click, feel free to share that with your next therapist, or when you're looking for the next therapist, asking about certain styles, and just kind of coming to understand what your preferences are. There are some therapists also that have little write-ups online where you can kind of see what their description is of their style. And that can be a good way to, that's not going to tell you everything because some of it's just personality and you see that when you get there. But that can be a good way to get a little bit of an idea of what you might be getting into.
Thank you. And then we did get one other one real quick. And I'm not sure if you'll know this off the top of your head, but if not, I just want to let this person know that we will follow up with them. We'll follow up with them after the webinar to get it answered. But the question was, is there a support group for individuals that have attempted suicide and survived and having a difficult time finding one?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I would think that it does exist, and I'd be happy to do a little bit of research and get back to that person. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. We'll look. We'll get their contact information, and we'll reach out and see what we can find to help with that.
Awesome. Yeah. Great question.
Great. Okay. So, well, Olivia, thank you so much. We are coming up on time. So as Olivia mentioned, this presentation is just a brief overview of mental health. And so if you're interested in learning more, we do have several additional virtual trainings that Jefferson Center offers at no cost to our community. We have our QPR training, which helps with suicide prevention. QPR stands for question, persuade, and refer, which is 3 simple steps that anyone can learn to help save a life from suicide. Just as people are trained in CPR, and that helps save thousands of lives each year, people trained in QPR learn how to recognize the warning signs of a suicide crisis and how to question, persuade, and refer someone to help. We also have our mental health first aid class, which Olivia mentioned. Jefferson Center offers this interactive 8-hour course free of charge to our community members. And when you attend mental health first aid, you'll learn how to identify the signs and symptoms of a range of mental health and substance use disorders, and will build the skills and confidence needed to help someone in crisis. So more information about both of those classes is available on our website under the Classes and Events tab. And then also just remember that no matter what you're facing in life, like if you're feeling overwhelmed, worried, or stressed, Jefferson Center is here for you. We're open, we're accepting new clients, and accessing care is easier than ever with virtual appointments. You can visit our website at jcmh.org or follow us on Facebook for more resources and information. And you can also reach us by calling 303-425-0300. So thank you again, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.